Her sharp gaze and pristine black robe marked Jasmine Williams as a rising star in the justice system, an attorney steadily climbing the ranks through dedication and brilliance. But one day, in the middle of defending her client, her own fight for justice began. Two security officers handcuffed her without checking her identification. When the officers discovered who they were dealing with, this incident would rock the courthouse to its core and end a judge's career entirely. The Atlanta courthouse's courtroom 7 was more crowded than usual that morning. Whispers traveled between the wooden benches as journalists prepared their notepads. This was the city's most talked about case. A police officer on trial for alleged racial violence against a young black man who dared to challenge him. Seated at the defense table, Jasmine Williams reviewed the final details in her file, reflecting on how her 34 years of life had prepared her for this moment. After completing her law education at Howard University, she had specialized in civil rights cases, working tirelessly to amplify the voices of disadvantaged communities. Her client today, Marcus Johnson, was a 23-year-old college student who had been stopped by a police officer while simply parking his car, then beaten under the pretense of resisting arrest. The footage was clear. Despite showing no resistance, Officer Derek Fleming had forced Marcus to the ground and knelt on him. When Judge Gregory Peters entered the courtroom, everyone rose. A white man in his 60s with stern features, he was one of Atlanta's longest-serving judges, known for his conservative leanings. This would be Jasmine's first appearance before him. "Be seated," Judge Peters said, settling into his bench. His eyes quickly scanned the room before focusing on Jasmine, his brow furrowing slightly. "Today we'll be hearing case number 26,575. Is the prosecution ready?" Prosecutor Thomas Mitchell stood. "Ready, Your Honor." "And the defense?" Jasmine rose, adjusting her black robe. "Ready, Your Honor." Defense attorney Jasmine Williams. Judge Peters peered at her over his glasses. "Attorney Williams, I don't recognize you. Where is David Coleman?" "Mr. Coleman is ill, Your Honor. I'm his associate and have taken over the case. All documentation has been filed." The judge frowned briefly, then nodded. "I see. Let's proceed." The trial began. Prosecutor Mitchell claimed in his opening statement that Officer Fleming was simply doing his job, stopping a suspicious vehicle and defending himself against the driver's aggressive behavior. By the time Jasmine's turn came, the tension in the room was palpable. She stood, turned to the jury, and raised her voice. "Today we are judging not just the actions of one police officer, but how a system operates. Marcus Johnson's only crime was being a young black man in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Objection!" Prosecutor Mitchell immediately interrupted. "The defense is straying from the case and engaging in emotional manipulation." Judge Peters promptly agreed. "Sustained. Attorney Williams, please focus on the indictment and avoid political rhetoric." Jasmine nodded calmly, though the determination in her eyes remained undiminished. "I understand, Your Honor. My client, Marcus Johnson, was stopped without cause on the night of March 12th after parking his car, then subjected to physical violence. The video footage from the scene." "This evidence hasn't yet been admitted by the court," Judge Peters interjected, frowning. "Your Honor, we've filed all the necessary motions for these videos to be admitted as evidence," Jasmine said, maintaining her tone. "And a determination hasn't been made yet," Judge Peters replied coldly. "Until they're admitted, you can't refer to them." Jasmine took a deep breath. "Understood, Your Honor. Then with your permission, I'll proceed based on witness testimonies." As the trial progressed, Jasmine sensed the dynamics in the courtroom. Judge Peters was rejecting nearly every objection she raised, questioning her every inquiry, cutting off her arguments. This couldn't be coincidence. During the lunch recess, Jasmine met with her client Marcus. "The judge is showing bias against us, but we won't give up," she said resolutely. "Our evidence is strong." Marcus nodded anxiously. "Ms. Williams, what I've heard about that judge, he's never been fair to any black defendant." "Maybe, but today will be different," Jasmine said, pulling a document from her file. "In the afternoon session, I'll present the police officer's past complaint records. It will come out that he's been involved in similar incidents before." Marcus smiled slightly. "I'm lucky to have an attorney like you." When the afternoon session began, Jasmine called the defense's first witness, a store owner who had witnessed the incident. The man confirmed that Marcus had never resisted the police, that he had been polite and cooperative. The defendant was just reaching into his pocket to show his ID when Officer Fleming suddenly forced him to the ground, the witness recounted. Just then, the back doors of the courtroom opened and two security officers entered. They headed directly to the defense table. Jasmine, continuing to question the witness, didn't notice the officers approaching. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," one of the officers said, placing his hand on Jasmine's shoulder. Jasmine turned in surprise. "What? Why? Can't you see the trial is in progress?" "May we see your identification?" the other officer asked harshly. "My ID is in my bag," Jasmine said, pointing to her bag on the table. "But I'm defending my client right now. Can't this wait? This is a secure area, and we have doubts about your authorization to be here," the first officer said, taking out handcuffs. Jasmine was shocked. "I'm an attorney. I'm the defense attorney for this case." "Put your hands behind your back, please," the officer said, now with a more authoritative tone. The courtroom fell silent. Jury members watched in astonishment. Marcus jumped up in panic. "No, she's my lawyer." Jasmine, understanding the seriousness of the situation, tried to remain calm. "Judge Peters, please intervene. I am the officially appointed defense attorney for Marcus Johnson." Judge Peters was watching from his bench. He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. "I don't set security protocols. We'll recess until this matter is resolved." Jasmine looked at the judge in disbelief. "Your Honor, this is unacceptable. My attorney ID is in my bag. It can be verified." But the officers had already placed the handcuffs on her. Murmurs now rose in the courtroom. Journalists were taking notes, and spectators were whispering in shock. "This is racism," Marcus shouted, tears in his eyes. "You would never treat another attorney like this." "Silence the defendant," Judge Peters said, striking his gavel. "Security, escort the attorney out and verify her identity." As Jasmine was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, she kept her head high, though anger and disappointment filled her eyes. In the corridor, they encountered the courthouse's chief prosecutor, Richard Thompson. "What's going on here?" Thompson asked, his eyes fixed on the handcuffed Jasmine. "Identity check, sir," one of the officers said. "This woman claims to be an attorney, but we're suspicious." Thompson's face filled with surprise. This is Jasmine Williams. Of course she's an attorney." "She has no ID, sir," the officer said defensively. "My ID is in my bag," Jasmine said calmly, but they didn't even bother to check. Thompson immediately turned to the officers. "Remove those handcuffs at once." Then he looked at Jasmine. "I apologize, Ms. Williams. This is unacceptable." After the handcuffs were removed, Jasmine took her ID from her bag. Not just a lawyer's ID, but also a federal credential showing she was a senior advisor in the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. The officers' faces paled. Thompson's jaw dropped. "You're with the Justice Department?" "Yes," Jasmine said, showing her ID. "And I'm here not only as an attorney, but also as a federal observer. I'm investigating allegations of systemic racism in the Atlanta courthouse." Thompson's expression changed. He now looked worried. "Ms. Williams, please understand, this must be a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Jasmine raised her eyebrows. "I'm certain Judge Peters recognized me. In fact, in the letter I sent him last week, I informed him that I would be present at Marcus Johnson's trial today as both a defense attorney and a federal observer." Thompson's eyes were now filled with fear. This is a very serious allegation." "And I am a very serious person, Mr. Thompson," Jasmine said, taking her bag. "Now allow me to return to my client. I will certainly include this incident in my report." When she returned to the courtroom, Jasmine felt everyone's eyes on her. Marcus looked at her anxiously, clearly relieved. Judge Peters appeared uncomfortable. "Your Honor," Jasmine said as she took her place, "I formally object to being removed from the courtroom in handcuffs and being prevented from performing my defense duties. Additionally, I wish to inform you that this incident will be included in the Justice Department's investigation into practices at the Atlanta courthouse." The room suddenly fell silent. Jury members looked at each other in astonishment. Judge Peters' face turned pale. "You're with the Justice Department?" Peters asked, his voice trembling. I'm a senior advisor in the Civil Rights Division, Your Honor, Jasmine said calmly. And for the past 6 months, I've been examining race-based cases heard in this court. Now, with your permission, I'd like to continue with the trial. Judge Peters cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Of course, we'll continue with the trial, but nothing was the same anymore. Judge Peters now approached each of Jasmine's questions and arguments carefully, evaluating the prosecutor's objections more thoroughly. Prosecutor Mitchell looked sweaty and tense. Jasmine resumed her witness examination. Then she presented evidence of Officer Fleming's past complaint records, documents showing he had previously stopped 3 different black citizens in a similar manner, all of whom had filed complaints. These records show that what my client Marcus Johnson experienced wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a systemic problem, Jasmine said, turning to the jury. And unfortunately, these kinds of incidents don't just happen on the streets, but in courtrooms, even here today. Judge Peters ignored Jasmine's indirect criticism, but the tension on his face was clearly visible. At the end of the trial, Jasmine delivered her closing statement. There was power in her voice, sharp certainty in her words. Justice is said to be blind, but what we've seen here today shows that isn't always true. Marcus Johnson's only crime was being a young black man walking in the park. And today I was handcuffed for being a black attorney performing my defense duties in the courtroom. Members of the jury, today you're evaluating not just a police officer's actions, but how a system operates. Deep silence dominated the courtroom. Jury members listened attentively, some taking notes. Judge Peters shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Finally, the jury retired to reach a verdict. In the waiting room, Marcus looked anxiously at Jasmine. What happens now? He asked. Justice will prevail, Jasmine said confidently, both for your case and for the other injustices that have occurred in this courthouse. Several hours later, the jury delivered its verdict. Officer Derek Fleming was found guilty of excessive use of force. Marcus Johnson was acquitted. In the following weeks, Jasmine's experience in the courtroom was reported in the national press. The Justice Department launched an official investigation into practices at the Atlanta courthouse. The 2 security officers were suspended, later fired for improper protocol, and the most striking development. As the investigation deepened, Judge Gregory Peters' history came under scrutiny. The Civil Rights Division examined Peters' decisions over the past 5 years and uncovered a striking pattern: a clear bias against black defendants, unfair treatment of defense attorneys, and systematic neglect. 2 months later, Judge Gregory Peters was forced to resign due to the ethics investigation and public pressure. Once a respected figure among his colleagues, his name had now become one of the symbols of racism in the justice system. Jasmine Williams continued her career, but she was no longer just an attorney. She had become the face of justice reform in Atlanta. She appeared on television programs, gave talks at universities, and fought for systemic change. One day she happened to encounter former Judge Peters at a restaurant. Peters averted his eyes when he saw her, but Jasmine walked directly to his table. Mr. Peters, she said calmly. Peters raised his head nervously. Ms. Williams. I want to ask you a question, Jasmine said. That day in the courtroom, did you recognize me? I know you received my letter and knew who I was. Peters was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. Yes, I recognized you. And yet, you allowed the security officers to handcuff me. It was a matter of protocol, Peters said defensively. Jasmine smiled, but there was cold determination in her eyes. No, Mr. Peters, it was a matter of character, and that day your character was revealed to everyone. Jasmine turned and left the restaurant, leaving behind a thoughtful and regretful former judge. Justice, though sometimes delayed, always found its way.